KTN News.
Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta's visit to the county of Kisumu has, in the eyes of some political analysts, raised the question of politics of tokenism. Duncan Haimba spoke to Professor Peter Wanyande, who is a political science professor at the University of Nairobi and political analyst as well, on what this means for the future of politics. Listen in.
On Sunday, once again, President Uhuru Kenyatta was descending in the lakeside city of Kisumu, and he did so by touching the ground with a solid, or rather a heavy, 15-member delegation from his cabinet, in what many have interpreted as a show of political might. Professor Peter Wanyande, as a political analyst, a political scientist, what does this mean when you look at the number of visits that President Uhuru Kenyatta has made to the lakeside city of Kisumu, and more so by extension we talk of the Nyanza region, this time round in his second term in office?
Thank you very much. I think the visit by the President to Nyanza, and in particular to Kisumu, was significant in relation to the handshake that the President had with the Right Honorable Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga. I think the idea is, one, to demonstrate that that handshake, which was really meant to demonstrate unity not only between the two, but unity of this country. That was intended to demonstrate that that unity is solid and that there is no need for people to begin to think that it is shaky. And therefore, that should be seen in that light. But in terms of the number of cabinet ministers and dignitaries that went to the president, I think that is also significant in the sense that he's saying it is not just the president and Raila Odinga who are in this thing, but that the government as a whole is supportive of this handshake because of the objectives of the handshake. A lot of people do not appreciate the fact that the handshake was just a symbol of something. It was at the tail end of negotiations that went on between Raila Amolo Odinga and the president, and that was reflected in those 9 points that they raised in the BBI. Issues of improving the electoral process, strengthening devolution, fighting ethnicity and corruption and all those things. And they are saying that this is something that the government, by going by all these people to Kisumu, they are saying these are points that the entire government under President Uhuru Kenyatta has embraced, and they would like to see it survive. I think that is the way in which I would like to interpret that big delegation of government officers, cabinet secretaries and permanent secretaries, or principal secretaries they are called these days, going to Kisumu. So it is significant.
When you look at Raila Odinga, 2008, he made a comeback into government as a prime minister with 50-50 power sharing. There are various projects that maybe were initiated during that period. And then there is this handshake and the number of projects that have come to fore, and some that have been commissioned and they are now running, basically that they've gone maybe in under 2 years or 3 years. When you compare the two, what has changed this time round, and what does this mean in terms of being politically correct?
One major point to remember is that the relations between President Kibaki at that time and the Prime Minister Raila Odinga was really very, as it were, strained. It was a very strained relationship. I think Kibaki looks like was actually forced into that arrangement where he became president and Raila Odinga became prime minister. This time around, I don't think this has been forced by any forces. Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, on their own initiative, thought it was necessary to deal with this problem that they were seeing in the country. And we must also remember the challenges that the country was facing at the time Raila and Kenyatta shook hands. But when I say shook hands, I actually mean when they discussed a number of things that eventually led to the handshake. The country was actually becoming completely ungovernable. This was not in the interest of Kenyatta as the president. This was not in the interest of Raila Amolo Odinga as leader, as it were, at that time of the opposition, nor was it in the interest of this country. For example, foreign investors were now beginning to be reluctant to invest in the country, and yet the country needed foreign investment just as much as the country needed domestic investment. And combined, if you combine all those forces, you begin to see that it was not something that was in the interest of either Odinga or Kenyatta. And that informed, actually, the stability that we have seen in this handshake, or since this handshake. And I think Kenyatta is telling the country, and indeed the entire world, that as a president of this country, he would like to see a change, not only in the relationship between opposition and ruling party, the Jubilee, but actually opposition in the way in which we handle politics. I think he's telling this country that for once we want to be to promote politics of trust, because this has been elusive in this country. You remember the various memorandum of understanding that has been signed in the past and then broken. I think he's telling them that this time around he wants this to develop a politics of trust.
Finally, are we back into the era of politics of tokenism, in that you have to be politically correct or politically aligned for the goodies, for the political manner to drop on the ground?
You know, when you say we're coming back, I want to correct that, because that suggests that we had abandoned the politics of tokenism. I don't think that has been abandoned. You remember, we are in an African country, and we are in a country that for years and years, in fact decades since independence, has actually practiced this, what you call politics of tokenism. In fact, President Moi, during his time, made it very clear when he said, siasa mbaya, maisha mbaya. What he was saying is that if you don't agree with government, if you are not politically correct according to him, you and your region will not benefit from government services, which was a very big mistake, because services, government services, should be given to citizens and regions as a right. As a right, one, because they're citizens, and secondly, because they pay taxes. All of us pay taxes. So, and it's the responsibility anyway of government to provide these services of a public nature. So it was a big mistake, but it served those in power, that this politics of tokenism. And that is why we had for a very long time this patronage politics, where you have the president as the grand patron, and then he establishes mini patrons as you go down to the grassroots and so on. Basically saying, unless this patron is in line, does things that I want as president, they will not get what they want. And we have never really abandoned it. Yes, we are working towards that. The Constitution of Kenya 2010 sought and still seeks to kind of eradicate that. But my brother, political culture is one of those things that is very difficult to eliminate. It takes time. You can see what is happening with our governors. They are basically behaving the same way that the president at the national level since our independence have been behaving. You know, they think that people should pay homage to them, people should adore them, people should sing when they arrive and so on. Because the political culture, they still believe and behave, some of them, as if the citizens have absolutely no say. The citizens too have not yet developed what we might call a civic culture, a culture in which they recognize that they have a role to play in governing of the country, and that they can actually, as citizens, either in their individual or group capacity, influence political developments. They have not yet done that, but that is because of our political history and our political culture. So it will take time. So we still have that politics of patronage, we still have that politics of tokenism, as you call it, and it's going to be there for a time. But we must work towards it by implementing the Constitution, doing things according to the Constitution. If we did things according to the Constitution, actually, this will not arise, because the Constitution is very clear about how you distribute resources to all parts of the country, including the Equalization Fund, recognizing that some parts of this country had been economically, politically marginalized for a long time, and that they must now be, as it were, brought back to the level of other regions.
Briefly, as we finish, last year a state lodge was opened in the larger Kisii region. 2 sporting facilities in Kisumu, Jaramogi, Jomo Kenyatta. We've seen the revamping of the port, the water sanitization project in Yala, the roads and all that. Do you think President Uhuru Kenyatta has been able to undo what was considered as the ills perpetuated by the previous regimes within this short period under the handshake? Briefly.
I think he has, and I think credit goes to him as leader of government that he's been able to, as it were, unlock these things. You remember, for example, the headquarters of Nyanza province, the provincial headquarters, took 15 years to actually build, when other regional headquarters had been, that started after it, were already built. And the people of Nyanza, both, in Kisii, Kuria, the Luos, for a long time really felt marginalized in terms of economic development. There were cases where development plans for the region were in place, but they were never implemented. But now Uhuru has, in this last 3-4 years, actually made a complete about turn. He said these projects must be completed, they must serve the people of this region because they are citizens like any other citizen. So I think he has.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your time. Of course, Professor Peter Wanyande, lecturer at Nairobi University, also a member of the defunct Constitutional Implementation Committee that babied this constitution in 2010. My name is Duncan Haimba. Over to you in studio.
All right, Duncan Haimba, thank you for that interview. But then I need to bring you up to date with the latest information. What you're seeing on your screens right now is a breaking news concerning the murder of the school principal. That is a story that Ibrahim Karanja earlier on, when he started the bulletin, was talking to us about, where the High Court has actually sentenced Jane Muthoni to 30 years. The teacher and a former headmistress has been convicted of murdering her school principal husband to 30 years in jail. And the court found Muthoni guilty of murdering her husband, Solomon Mwangi, the principal of Kiru Boys High School, between November 6th and 11th, 2016. Now, the mother of 3 is the former headmistress of Hikashiri Secondary School in Kiambu, and also convicted was one of the 3 men, that is Isaac Nganga Alas Gikoyu. Ibrahim Karanja has been following up on this story from the courtrooms. Ibrahim Karanja, this is a developing story, 30 years for Jane Muthoni.
Yes, Brenda, it is almost over in this particular case if the convicted persons do not appeal in the next 14 days. That is Jane Muthoni, the former principal of Ishashiri Girls Secondary School, that is in Gatondo, Kiambu County, and the co-accused Isaac Nganga, alias Gikoyo. They have today, this morning, been